So we're a little early, but we welcome you to the second hour of Mindshifters Radio, and today is Tuesday, August the 22nd, 2023, and our call-in number is 563-999-3581, and press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk to us, and we would love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. And got a few people still hanging in there with us from the first hour and some new people coming in. So we welcome you to the show and invite you to go to the website, which is whyagain.org, and look around, click on things, listen to the archives of the Mindshifters Radio. There are also, if you click on Start Here, first thing that comes up is the current 7-step and the 7-step short worksheets, and you can click and download those. Then there are the 2 videos, which I'm not sure why it just now says this video is unavailable. I'll check on that. But if you, oh, okay, they came back up. It must have been something on my internet. If you ever run into something that's not working on the website, please let me know. Drop me a line, text me, email, whichever, and let me know what's going on, what the URL is. Anyway, if you scroll on down past, there's the book, the chapter 24, and the PowerPoint for the Aramaic forgiveness, reality stress management. And if you go on down, there's one that says special instructional MP3s on wake-up sheets and special shows. And so if you click that, I've been putting the shows for the pseudo solutions that Michael's been talking about. He did that on August the 10th, the 17th, the 18th, and yesterday. I don't have yesterday's up yet, but if that has been interest, you can click on those and listen again to get what the pseudo solutions are. And that is that what he's reading from is part of just one worksheet that we did in the codependence to interdependence intensive. So if you are part of the self-study, then you'll be able to get that, access that, and experience the whole thing. It's not made available to the public. Michael is reading over it and talking about it, but as far as the worksheet itself, it's 14 pages, I believe, now. And it is not out on the website, and we're keeping that exclusively for the intensive. But it's awesome information, and so we have been putting those special shows out there so you can go back and re-listen and get what the pseudo solutions are and kind of tap into the power person dynamics. So we welcome you to the show. If you have any questions, please press 1 and ask your questions or give us your comments or which way you would like to go on it. I'm going to check and see if Michael's having any issues getting in. And let us know what's happening for you. Have you had any experiences? Some people have been sharing their experiences of doing the codependence intensive and how powerful it is, even though that it's a self-study. You can go at your own pace. You can do it in the 17 weeks. You know, the first intensive we did was 14 weeks. And then this worksheet that he's going over is extended our second intensive to 17 weeks. So when you're doing the self-study, it's broken down by week 1, week 2, all the way up to week 17. And you could do it in 17 weeks, or you can take a year, 2 years, whatever. Do it at your own pace at home. And we invite you to do that because it's super powerful. And I'm going to welcome Michael to the show.
Thank you, dear heart, and welcome everybody. Delighted and honored that you're here. And as you were saying, the progress that people are making in doing that intensive, you know, when we do the intensive, it includes a pre and post personal code evaluation. And the personal code evaluation is something that's based on what's called the MMPI, Minnesota Fault Personality Inventory. And I can remember the first time that Dr. Tim came to Heartland. You know, he was a clinical psychologist for, at that time, going on close to 40 years, I think. And we did the evaluation, and we talked about the changes in scores. And he was like, what do you mean changes in scores? So, well, you know, the changes that we see as people do this work, I think, no, wait a minute. When people get this done, this picture that's their life profile. Those things don't change. Well, they do if they engage in actual forgiveness and these tools. And so there's one gentleman, without mentioning a name, who started back in June of last year, and he completed the intensive January 1st of 2023 and did his evaluation. So the scores are broken down into 10 different areas. Now again, these are scores that according to psychology don't ever change. And so just looking at raw numbers and change in scores, code evaluation breaks one's personal code down into 10 different areas. So there's a score for each area. Scores that theoretically don't change. So the first one is stress management, and this gentleman had a 50-point improvement on a scale of 100. So 50% of the scale he increased in stress management. In honoring others, a 28-point increase. In honoring self, which was one of his highest scores when he started, he went up 11 points. Stayed the same in honoring truth. Now, and basically what happens, when people do the evaluation, there are 10 different areas, and we give them assignments in 3 of those areas. So for this gentleman, one of his highest scores was honoring truth when he started. He was given assignments in 3 other areas. All 3 of those areas and others passed his truth score. So when he completed the intensive, his score was identical on truth. However, it was now his number 1 score. It was number 5. Everything else passed it. Doing the assignments for each one changes those scores. His number 1 challenge when he started the intensive was freedom from fear, and it was in major crisis, and he went up 67 points in fear, in healing fear. Hostility is the 6th area, and his increase over 6 months of doing that codependence to interdependence communication practice was 39 points. His highest score was honoring laws of living, and that's basically seeing oneself, or comes from people tend to see themselves as victims. His score went down just 6 points on that. So it was his highest score, went down a negligible amount, but again, everything else passed it. So then that score on honoring laws of living became his number 2 challenge when he completed the course. So when you do the post-evaluation, you know exactly how effective your work has been because you can see the change in your scores. His nutrition, digestion, toxicity was his highest score when he started, and it stayed exactly the same. It was almost off the charts. It couldn't go anywhere. It was almost at 100. Use of will went up 22 points. And then validity or consistency, one of the scales on the evaluation. If you've ever done the evaluation, you'll remember that when you did it, there was a question right there at the beginning, and then you got to the same question toward the end, and you're like, well, they already asked that question. Why are they asking it now? Well, the way that it's set up, it's couched in certain questions that will tend to have certain brain cells firing. And if there's a tendency for people to be double-minded, where, today they're answering yes to this, and tomorrow it's no, and the next day it's yes, and the next day it's no, where the consistency of mind is not there. That was one of his highest scores when he started, and he went up 15 points on that, almost off the scales. So the reliability of his mind once he's moving somewhere just improved by 16 points and almost up at 100%. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of changes that can happen. And, when psychology says those scores can't change, and then you see them changing by 30, 50, 60, 70 points, it's pretty amazing. We've seen people, we had one gentleman who came to Heartland, this goes back very early days, 32 to maybe 33 years ago. And he was in crisis university. He was a former vet and had what they call PTSD. And his first evaluation, he was in crisis in virtually everything. And when he completed summer, he actually stayed for the whole summer. Almost every one of his scores was up in the 90th plus percentile. It's just, if you have the tools, you can change the content and the flow of this thing called the mind. And lots of people have what are called mental disorders, diagnosed with mental illness. And when you start removing the thought disorders that reflect as what they call mental illness disappears. So we were talking about anesthetics and uncovering, let's see, I'm looking for, we were at the point where we were talking about what kind of stories did I tell myself that I need to heal to convince myself that the power person message that I either received or made up was true. Things like, I'm so stupid, I deserve to suffer, I'm a bad person, I deserve what I get. Those kinds of messages. What did I have to tell myself about myself? So we asked the question. It's actually step 10 in the new Power Person worksheet. What stories did you tell yourself about your power person to convince them that what they told you was true? And now it's what stories did I tell myself to convince myself that the power person messages that I made up or received were true? And the next step is looking at, it's interesting if you look at the word spelling. I mean, we say that's putting this group of characters together. But look at the word behind the word, putting people under a spell. And this is done with words. It's done with letters. And so the question we ask at this step in the worksheet is, when you were under the spell of the power person dynamic, you believe the perceptual constructs of your mind, and then we're asking you to honor truth and actually look at the facts and determine whether or not your mind's construct is really, truly provable. Asking yourself the question, is the conclusion that I've generated in my mind really true? And ask yourself, and the whole idea of this worksheet, the whole idea of the codependence to interdependence, communication, practical, intensive, is to unwind the thought disorders of the mind related to the power person. And virtually every person's life on planet Earth today is controlled by this power person dynamic. That's my offering. Just take a look at the news and look at the amount of hostility and fear and rage and war and suffering and drama and trauma. That's all power person stuff. So to actually start to question yourself, what is it in the actuality of the situation, if I really allow it in, that would support me in healing my underlying thought disorders? So one might have come to the conclusion that, well, my power person never supported me. And once that thought was planted, then whatever support was offered was literally refused. And so now the question's being asked, if I tell myself the truth, were there ways that I blocked awareness of how they supported me, how they were true to me? And the request is to start to look at alternative realities, the one your mind is generating. And the idea here is to escape from the generationally patterned tendency to generate realities about self and others that are based in hostility or fear. So, You might move into something like, I'm experiencing an old pattern here. I got it, man. I've been through this 87 different times with 42 different people. Maybe it's time for me to forgive my part in this. And to look at the thought disorders, start to look at the emotions going on in your world. Identify your emotion. And then step up, rather than, as most people do, living in the one world universal religion of blame. You made me feel mad. You made me feel sad. You hurt me. Rather than living in that, stop and ask yourself the question. And it actually refers back to an earlier step to look at something you did earlier. And identify your emotion, and then let yourself become aware of the thought you used to create that emotion. If the emotion, let's say, is guilt, and you tap into feeling the emotion of guilt, and gee, every time I'm around my power person, my parent, I feel guilty. They make me feel guilty. It's like, no, you have thought disorders that create guilt, and of course, if they're related to your power person, whenever you're around them, those thoughts are going to tend to move. But if you start to own the thoughts, then you start to change the thoughts. You don't have to be stuck with those thought disorders. And it can be very helpful to identify where you're feeling the emotional energy in your body. Where is the energy stored? Where is it moving? Then we move forward to looking at any form of fear or hostility-based messages and take responsibility for having given fear and or hostility-based messages to others or to self. These things tend to be patterned in the mind. And oftentimes the hostility and fear-based messages are done to achieve the goal of control, of avoidance, of distraction, of deflection. And to look into those messages. And as you start to review these things, you get to realize these are my thoughts and I can change them. If the majority of my thoughts are based in hostility and fear around any given situation, then I'm going to suffer from a literal mental illness in that situation. People break down. I'm powerless. I can't help it. I can't do anything. I can't escape from this. So once you've identified the messages that you've given to either yourself or to others, then the next step is to go back and look at, to recall a time, look at each message that you've used to, do any kind of control or avoidance, distraction, deflection. Literally write those messages down. There's space in the worksheet to write those down. And then the next step, I recall a time when my power person conveyed those messages to me. And so go back situation by situation, and what you'll find is the habitual ways that one tends to avoid, distract, control, deflect, were things that were learned in relationship to the power person, or things that one observed the power person doing. So then take each of those messages and just take a look and see if there was a time when your power person gave you that message, and make note of how you felt when you received those messages. Then we move into what, in general, did I perceive my power person's needs to be? And what did my power person do to get those needs met? And were their behaviors just and fair? And so the invitation at this stage in the worksheet is to identify a power person behavior and then just do the assessment. Was it just and fair? And then your rationale, why or why not. And what this will do is it will tend, as you start to focus there, to bring you into a more responsible place with your own power person thinking, the dynamics that went on with your power person. And then ask yourself the question, have I ever exhibited any needs similar to my power person? And most people find, yeah, they're all the same ones. And then what have you done to get your needs met, and were your behaviors just and fair? Why or why not? And then go back and check it out with what you saw with the power person. You'll probably find there's a whole lot of projection there. Take a look at what did I either think or feel I had to do to meet my power person's needs. And were those actions based in love or in fear or hostility? So what did I either think or feel? Like they say, well, whenever I'm around my dad, whenever I'm around my mom, I feel like I need to, whatever they, so you want to identify that and recognize that all of those feelings are just based on aberrant thinking. You can choose to do those things out of choice without having the hostility or fear dynamic behind it. Just say no. The next stage in the worksheet is to start to look at, was there ever punishment from your power person? And if so, how were you punished? And to really look closely, we're unwinding the way that your mind generates realities around your power person, and the realities that tend to drive you when you become ultra stressed. This is what it will allow you to unwind. So if there was punishment, how did I feel? What was my emotional response? And were there any thoughts or thought disorders in response to that punishment? If you talk to average psychologists today, they'll tell you that 90 to 95, maybe as much as 98% of our thinking is unconscious. And if we never review these things, then whenever they're resonated into activity, and stress is what resonates them into activity, they'll tend to take over. They'll become the behaviors that you do, oftentimes against your own will and choice. It isn't Dr. Feelgood to surface and look at them, but it sure is Dr. Heelgood. You sure can step in and change those dynamics consciously, purposely. And then the worksheet invites you to take a look and see if you've ever done any of the behaviors, including the punishment, that you observed your power person using to get you to achieve the goals they had for you. If I've done any of those behaviors, who did I do it to? How did it feel in my body when I did those behaviors? And of course, how do you suppose it felt for them, the person that you did the behavior to? Did you have to give anything up in order to meet your power person's needs? Remember, power person is the person who had more control over your life at some point than you did, was not functioning out of love, and you perceived it as survival. This leads, when those three things happen simultaneously, and it's usually a child and a parent, it leads to massive blocks of unconscious information that, when resonated into activity, takes over one's life, oftentimes against their own will and choice. And the tendency is for these things to be replicated. You go back to the Aramaic language, and you hear their understanding of what's going on. You hear them say, look to the lives of the fathers, for ours are but a shadow of theirs upon the earth. And of course, we're not just talking about the male parent. Look to the lives of the parents. In one place, it specifically says the sins, and remember that word sin is an archery term, simply means off the mark. The energetic patterns, the behavior patterns, the word patterns, the thought patterns, the punishment patterns that were off the mark for a human being, off the mark with love, will tend to be passed, will be passed from three up to three at the third and fourth generation, pardon me. And so as you review those things, especially if you do the forgiveness work that empowers you, or I should say more correctly, uncovers the empowerment that is already in you. You already have everything you need within you. The teacher that's going to show it to you is within you. It's not out here in the world. And so the next question that the worksheet asks is, did my power person ever block, ignore, or prevent their own needs from being met? And if so, how did they do that? And then, have you ever done the same? Take a look at whether or not you blocked, ignored, or prevented your own needs from being met. The next section goes into asking the question that if you were raised in a codependent household, and how can you tell if you were raised in a codependent household? Did you ever hear the words, you made me? You make me so mad? That's a codependent household. Pretty rare for there to be something other than that. So if you were raised in a codependent household, what were the rules you perceived you needed to follow in order to survive in that household? What, when you were functioning out of your power person dynamic, was your definition of love? And if your definition of love was something like, I love you, do you love me? Then know that you're not talking about love at all, because the essence of human life is love. It's a noun. It's a state of being. It's who we are. What we're looking to do with this work is to uncover, to support each person in uncovering the truth of their being as love and coming into direct, full experience of that. And if you look at the definitions of love that you learned in relationship to your power person, how's that impacted your relationships? How's that played out for you? How's it working for you? The objective of this particular intensive, the objective of this and every worksheet, is to free us from the habituated generational thought, word, and behavior patterns that tend to run people unconsciously. And when you say to somebody, why did you do that? Most people come up with, I don't know. And what they're really saying is, I have this unconscious prompt in my mind when I have this type of goal to step into this particular type of behavior. And if the behavior is based in some form of hostility or fear, when you get right down to the root of it, the majority of it was initiated in response to and in mimicking power person dynamic. What we're looking to do with this tool, because it runs so many lives, is to support people in understanding these dynamics and clean them up in their own lives, in their own minds. So that's our objective. And I hope you find that useful. And Miss Jeannie, do we have everybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
No, it is all quiet. So someone press 1. You're first in line. We started early, so we've got 39 minutes. We have plenty of time.
Yay. So if you're in listener land and you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, our call-in number is 563-999-3581. If you call that number, you'll be listening to the show directly on your phone. And then if you push 1, that will raise a hand in the control panel, and we'll be having a conversation. So what's on your mind? How can we support you? Push 1. Let's talk about it.
I worked with someone the other day who asked the question of, you know, he realized he was in a codependent relationship, and it's like, why? How does that happen? You kind of described that, but...
Well, if you look at our Healing Through Relationships workshop, one of the serious, but I present it kind of as a tongue-in-cheek line that I have in that workshop that I repeat is most relationships are based in matching bags of garbage. And the world calls them love relationships. We have this attraction to one particular person, and occasionally it might be because of the state of being of each of those two people. But more often than not, it's the bags of garbage that create the resonance that causes us to turn our heads in a particular direction because of that energy link. People go into their relationships based on matching bags of garbage, hiding, pretending to be something that they're not, and hiding whatever it is that they haven't dealt with in their lives. You know, oftentimes the message coming from the power person implies to a child that they're so broken that the child discards all awareness of who they are, and when they come to a new relationship, it's almost like, well, I know that who I am is worth nothing, therefore, what do you need for me to be in order to love me, quote unquote? Put those words in quotes because nobody's ever going to love you. Love isn't a verb, it's a noun, it's a state of being. So when one has bought into the idea that who they are has no real value, then they think that approval is love. And they'll do virtually anything to be approved of. You know, love is not a behavior trait. Love is not a behavior we can engage in. It's the essence of being a human being. And saying, I love you or I love myself is one of the most fundamental mistakes that we can make as human beings. And that might shock some people. But when most people say the words, I love you, I mean, you know, look at people who come together, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, please marry me. Now we get married. And then it isn't long before the honeymoon is over. And what has happened? What was called love is now turned to hate. It wasn't a relationship based in love. It was a relationship based in matching bags of garbage. I mean, it's so common that we have a saying for it in the culture. The honeymoon is over. What does that mean? Well, when they talk about love, we're talking about approval rather than attraction based in the truth of who we are. I'd offer it's an important, though subtle, truth to integrate, realizing that love is not a behavior trait, not a behavior you can engage in, not something you can get, not something you can do, not something you can give or get from another. It's our created essence. It's a state of being. So you can't love someone, you can't love self, because love is a noun. It's not a verb. When somebody tells their minds, be loving, my mind tries with the experiences and many false beliefs that it's acquired through 1,000 generations to guide me to being loving. Now, hold a newborn child and notice when you tap into the essence of that newborn that you're tapping into love, and the child's not loving you, the child is love. You listen to all the insane definitions of love. Our culture, how many have ever heard a parent say, I'm only doing this, i.e. beating you or punishing you because I love you. This hurts me more than it hurts you. That's not human life. That's not a human being functioning. But that's the repeating of a generational belief or something that somebody read in a book, that the best way to, quote unquote, love a child is to beat them into submission. I mean, you hear it out of churchianity all the time. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Excuse me, the rod was something you leaned on for support. It was not something you beat a little kid with. I can't tell you over the years how many people, when I've talked about this topic, said, well, you know, my father beat me, whipped me, is usually the word, didn't hurt me. Oh, really? Yeah, under stress. What kind of venom do you spew toward your partner? That's the venom that was put into you when your power person beat you. And when you say it didn't hurt you, you've totally and completely blocked from your life the sensitive state of being that you were in as a child and the overwhelming trauma and hurt of the first time that person who was supposed to cherish you turned their venom on you, turned their generational power person dynamic on you. There's so many false definitions of love that pass in most people's minds as love. It can be hate. It can be implanting fear, punishment, abuse, intimidation. It can all be accepted as a substitute for love. And someone doing that will convince you or attempt to convince you that they're only doing it because I love you. If one takes on the goal of realizing themselves as love and then sets goals for the mind to support them in functioning out of love, to be love, then that person could never get lost in such an error as the culture puts out there. If one holds those false definitions and sets goals based on those definitions, they'll get a feel-good hit of dopamine out of achieving that goal. Because when you achieve a goal, you get an internal reward, this hit of dopamine. And dopamine's been called happy powder. Oh, this feels good. The abusive parent gets a dopamine fix, a chemically induced internal dose of pleasure from abusing their child, because the mind can get lost in false definitions. I love the insight that Liam Neeson, the actor, offered. Quote, here's what he says: everyone says love hurts, but that's not true. Everyone gets these things confused with love, but in reality, love is the only thing in the world that covers up all pain and makes someone feel wonderful again. Love is the only thing in the world that doesn't hurt. Powerful thought, Liam. Thank you. My offering is that when you tap into the truth of who you are as love, it is the active presence of love in you that is the light in which truth becomes visible. There's a whole different process that happens in the mind when you shift out of telling your mind to be loving and tell your mind that you are love and to support you functioning as love. Because when you do that, my focus is now on my internal condition. And the mistakes that we've just talked about above become impossible to get lost in. From there, if errors have been made and correction is needed, that goal can be accomplished. But if you're trying to tell your mind to be loving, it'll go through every definition and misdefinition. You know, it's interesting that Vladimir Lenin, a man responsible probably for more deaths in history than any human being ever, said the way you destroy a culture is change the meaning of its words. So when you are asking your mind to support you functioning as love, rather than be whatever aberrant definitions perhaps are already in your mind, then corrections can occur and the goal can be accomplished. And the mind, when this course correction occurs, if I have the tools, will produce behavior prompts that support me experiencing the truth of who I am and what I am, rather than playing out the almost universal fraud that love is a verb. I've had people over the years not getting that distinction say to me, well, it's not a big deal, what does it matter? You know, okay, so if I'm going to be love or if I'm going to do love, what's the difference? There's no big deal. Well, let's use an example. Let's imagine that someone has a really severe circulatory disorder and they go to a specialist, a doctor, and the doctor tells them that they need a specific treatment to fix the problem with their cells, and they tell you that it involves the epidermis and epithelial cells, two different types of cells. And you ask the doctor, well, which cells are you going to treat? And the doctor says, what does it matter? It's not a big deal. It's just a few letters different. Epithelial, epidermis, what's it matter? We'll work on one or the other. How long are you going to hang out with that doctor? Be careful hanging out with people who tell you to be loving. And watch how, as they profess their quote-unquote supposed love for you, when the stress is up and the chips are down, what kind of energy they point at both themselves and at you. So there's a piece of information that you might feel helpful in recognizing that one of the goals of this work is to tap into that active presence of love, that state of being, and rather than setting ourselves up for failure by attempting to do love, then get your mind to support you in moving the direction of recognizing the truth about yourself and undoing any false self. You remember Yeshua says, for me, in order for you to live, you've got to die. So the work, the underlying work of this particular body of information is to learn to forgive, that is, remove anything that is unlike love, so that the only thing left is the truth of who you are.
You have a hand up?
You know, the Greeks tell us that Yeshua told us to love one another. He never said it. If you force that Greek imposed meaning into Yeshua's mouth, it leaves you stuck in an error upon which most of our other errors rest. Following the Greek idea, we try to do love, which is impossible. The command in Aramaic was worlds apart. It was to be love. One command leaves people striving to do the impossible. The other, the Aramaic, explains something achievable. And people who want to nullify the words there, remember that Yeshua says, power of life and death is in our words. Accurate words are important. Jeannie, you've got a thought for me?
We have a hand up.
Awesome. Let's say hello to our caller.
I believe it's Dan, 757. You're on the air.
Hey, y'all. Good to hear you.
Hey, welcome, good sir. How do you be?
I'd be well. Processing through feelings and thoughts and realities and all that kind of thing. And, enjoying the show today. And I had some thoughts and questions I wanted to share and ask.
Please do.
I'm relating to, our essence being love, and I think I've experienced or believed, many times even before coming to this work of like the need to remove or cancel anything unlike love and to just let that true self shine forth after. But that's a lot of canceling to do, right? Like it
tends to be a lot, yes, when you start that path.
So, but I relate to that being my essence, although there's part of me that I guess doesn't believe that, or it's kind of on the fence. But I know that my experience sort of with my tower person, my household growing up, is that I got sort of punished or shamed or discouraged when I was embodying that essence. The spontaneous and the being love was strongly discouraged. And I was sort of taught another definition that it had to do with sacrifice and suffering for other people and sort of aggrandizing yourself by suffering and being a martyr and all that kind of thing. But I guess I suspect what I'm sharing is like pretty common. But my question is, though,
you just described virtually the whole culture.
Right. Yes. So it's just, my brand with some subtle variations or whatever, but it's pretty much all of us, right? So, I have these memories and this pain inside me about being love, and then being really sharply punished or humiliated or shamed for that or discouraged. And so the things I get kind of hung up on is I've done a lot of, I guess healing or uncovering or digging around or remembering or therapy, all kinds of stuff, to recognize that I did, suffer different kinds of abuse as a child, and I was taught things that were wrong. But I also I want to recognize that I was in a way a victim of that, but I also don't want to fall into blaming my power person and my context I grew up in. Does that make sense? It's like I've kind of struggled on where is the balance there. I mean, what I've sort of come to is
2,000%.
So I'm an adult now. Go ahead.
No, I'm just affirming that 2,000%. If you get into the blame game, then probably what you're doing is replicating what your power person did. Was when they didn't want to be responsible for what they were experiencing, and then they blamed you. Look at you, kid. You make me so, whatever it is. And correction needs to occur. Correction from a connected space of love and responsibility. It's not about, I'm going to blame my power person. I'm looking at, you'll notice as I've been talking about it, that it's the message that was received from the power person or made up by me in response to the power person, because oftentimes it's a self-imposed thing. It's like, out of the content of my mind, I made this message up, and it's not something my power person ever even conceived of sending to me. But I project it, and that's where the forgiveness process comes in, and collapsing into, using the tool of forgiveness to collapse into oneself, to remove those dynamics rather than assign blame to somebody because we happen to either experience it with them or make it up through our interaction with them.
So would it, just sort of trying this on, would it be reasonable to say, I've got to recognize what I experienced as a child, where my learning came from. However, I am responsible for the realities I carry in my mind, and my interpretation or what I experience, whatever I'm carrying around, is mine to clean up. Is that kind of like we see it clearly? We're not pardoning someone else. We're not ignoring that, and we recognize the pain and suffering we may have gone through, but it's in our mind. It needs to be cleaned up by us, today with forgiveness tools. Would that be accurate?
Precisely. And
okay.
You may choose to pardon someone. You may look at, gee, I can remember this event that happened, and what my power person did was absolutely ridiculous, insane, off the mark. I can acknowledge that, and I can choose to pardon them. So I recognize, Mom or Dad, what you did, or big brother or neighbor down the street, that what you did was really off the mark, and I'll pardon you for that. And now I realize that my forgiveness work begins. Now I'm going to go inside myself and undo the effects of that interaction that impacted me so powerfully.
Right, because they have painful realities too, and I don't, there was a time where I sort of came up with this story about, my power person was being vicious and wanted to destroy me, and someone kind of pointed out, well, that's how your mind made sense of what was going on, but that doesn't mean that that's what their reality is. Probably more like doing something to try to survive emotionally.
Right, exactly. Or pass on the family tradition, which oftentimes, sadly, is based in, abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, to me, it was sort of textbook. I mean, I recognize, looking back, I believe that my role was, I was going to be the great hope for my parents, because if everything turned out right, then emotionally they would be rescued by me. But when I defied their expectations, it was like it was terrible. And I see how I carry that into relationships I have today.
There's a big reason for resolving power person dynamics.
Yeah, seems to inform everything.
Precisely. Yeah, when that content is held in the mind and resonated into activity by something that's actually happening in our world, then what the mind does, instead of being with what's actually happening in the world, the mind goes to its default content, usually a power person dynamic, constructs a whole view of the world, a whole detailed reality, complete with sight and sound, and substitutes that construct in the mind for what's actually happening. Most people rarely ever experience what's actually going on in the actual world. They go from one reality to another, never realizing that their mind is constructing a world out of unresolved power person dynamics. And as you free yourself of that, it's like everything changes.
Yeah, so a lot of time now I can, just going about my life, I can recognize when something like that is active. It's obvious to me that my stuff is being triggered into activity, and I'm not in touch with what's going on. I'm in touch with painful emotions within me. But as far as like canceling that on the spot or just letting it go, that is a lot more challenging for me than just recognizing that it's operating.
Well, and in fact, you can't just cancel it. That's an inappropriate use. To say, well, I've got this big painful router, so I'm just going to cancel it. Well, that's just not possible. That energy is the energy that's there. But when you realize that that particular construct of the mind, that particular reality is constructed as a result of holding a particular goal. Certain content is used by the mind every time a particular goal is activated in the mind. And so people will tend to live in those patterned realities. When the goal is canceled, the perceptual construct collapses, and when it collapses, that's what gives us access to the underlying energetic dynamic that tends to go back to the power person dynamic. And when I bring that forward in the presence of love, it dissolves. When I bring that energy directly into direct awareness, rather than projecting it into my brain's image of someone else, that I bring it forward directly to the presence of love, then it dissolves in me and I'm freed of that dynamic. And I certainly understand why the Greeks turned forgiveness into, okay, I'll let you off the hook for the pain that's happening inside of me, rather than, I think I'll go in and delete the pain that's inside of me. In the first century Aramaic language, the tool was being offered for, you're in pain? Oh, okay, here's how you delete it. Here's how you remove it. Here's how you forgive it. The Greeks came along and said, well, no, you don't want to be responsible for that. You don't want to know that that's yours. Just tell your neighbor it's their fault and let them off the hook. Forgive them for it. And so, it's been turned totally backward for centuries. And it's almost universal. I know when we did some work in the Spanish community, the word for forgive in Spanish is pardon.
Right.
It's all about pardoning rather than actually collapsing one's own perception and cleaning up the underlying content of the mind, which has been going on for generations and generations. And when we do that, it leads to the dissolution of what people think of as self. And that can be a scary step in the process. Because that self, that false self based in the power person dynamic, bears no resemblance to the truth of who we are as love. And yet, most people will refuse to go there. Go ahead.
Is that why I feel like I'm dying a lot of the time when I get intensely into this work? I have these...
Exactly, yes. It is experience when the false image of self, the non-being self, begins to crumble for most people because there's terror under that false self. They go into terror, and it is experienced as a very real death. You go back to Yeshua in the Aramaic, and he talks about, in order for you to live, you've got to die. He's saying, in order for the true being that you are to live, that which you thought you were has to be dismantled. It has to go. And many times it's experienced as a very real and very traumatic death experience.
Well, I've had that feeling a lot of times, but it's escalated since I've, gotten really into the worksheet process here recently. And, I was just out for a walk earlier, and I was like, I feel like everything's falling apart, and like my consciousness really, and I'm able to see that that's not as terrible a thing as I think it is, but it's scary and painful though at the same time.
Well, one of the things that happens when you uncover the energetic dynamics of the past is that experiences that were at some point in the past painful are recalled. And my take is it's really important to recognize that a memory of pain is just a memory of pain. We don't have to re-empower it in real time today. I remember when this terrible thing happened to me when I was 5. I just had this terrible memory, I don't have to make that real today and re-empower it as the tragic and terrible thing that it seemed to be when I was 5. So I can allow those memories to come forward and recognize that, oh, this is just a memory. I don't have to get lost in it.
Is it typical to have a lot of, sort of recalled pain and fear, but it's sort of vague? It doesn't necessarily attach to a specific cognitive memory or anything like that. So I've got a lot of that. It's kind of like free floating, and I don't know what it belongs to, but it seems intense.
Well, if you remember, one of the things we talk about is what we call a vitality meter. So let's imagine we've got a vitality meter. It goes from 1 to 10. When you're at full vitality level 10, everything's rocking, everything's moving. You can't possibly hide anything from yourself that's internal to you because your vitality is there and everything's available. Over time, what tends to happen if we're not being supported and functioning as love is that a painful experience comes along, and I have no idea that this painful experience is a result of a thought disorder that I have, that my pain is actually coming from my thought disorder. I think it's the situation out there, and I don't want to feel it, so I find a way to weaken myself. I find a way to bring my vitality down from a 10 to a 9. And I have an experience, and I bring it down to an 8, and a 6, and a 5, and a 4, and a 3. And then one day I get this vague recall of this big, terrible, painful thing that happened. And boy, I want to be finished with that. But it's a level 8 pain, and I'm only at a level 3 vitality. Now, I can say I want to get rid of that energetic pattern more than anything else in the world, but if I don't do what it takes to get back to a level 8 plus vitality, like, the way people hide things from themselves, the classic, virtually every bite of food in the culture, especially if you go into places like fast food restaurants, they're literally drugs. They're sugar, they're salt, they're oil, they're fat. That's it. It's like, it doesn't matter whether you go to the chicken restaurant, you go to the hamburger restaurant, you go to the, whatever. I don't want to get into naming any particular companies, but basically you go to the chicken restaurant and it's, well, what flavor of fat, salt, and sugar do you want here? And then you go to the burger restaurant, it's like, what flavor of fat, salt, and sugar are we going to have here? And all of those things are anesthetics or drugs that literally weaken our physiology, ultimately creating disease processes. And so one has to start to change the habits all the way across the board in order to build the vitality up. So now somebody's, instead of going and grabbing a quart of ice cream and showing it down, what I'm going to do is have a sprout salad. And then somebody gets up to a level 8 vitality, and it's like, man, I'm on top of it all. I just broke through a big issue today. I feel so great. And they go to bed. They're at this level 8 vitality. And in the morning, they wonder if anybody got the number of the Mack truck that went through the room during the night, because they're lower than a snake's belly. It's like, what happened? I was feeling so great last night. Well, here's what happened. You hit that level 8 plus vitality, and that old 8 toxin, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, relational, thought disorder, that toxic energy now is starting to unwind, and you're feeling the impact of it. So the new level of vitality is what opens the next depth of what needs to be healed, and you get to go through the detox process. I'm not going to get the full-blown cognitive recall of that memory until I get to a level 8 vitality. But I will process it. If I'm down at a 3 and I get to a level 5 vitality, I'll do a certain amount of work around that. I'll have this vague recall. I won't know exactly what it was, but I'll clean something up. And then I get to a level 6 vitality, and I clean that one up on a level. And I get to a level 7 vitality, and man, I'm starting to rock through this stuff. And then, bingo, I go to bed, I'm excited, I'm delighted, I know I'm on the right track, and I have the most traumatic, horrible dreams, and I'm in that energy in the morning when I wake up. And all of a sudden I have this full-blown recall of this horrible thing that happened. because I'm at a level of vitality where I'm able to handle it. You know, the body-mind unit has this built-in suppress mechanism, and if I don't have the vitality to handle a particular issue, it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to surface. Because literally, the toxic release could kill me. So the body-mind unit has this built-in protect mechanism until I get to a level of vitality higher than the depth of the toxic experience, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, relational, whatever it is. Until I get to a level where I can handle that, it's not going to surface fully. But I'll work at it in dribs and drabs and pieces.
Right.
And then one day the full-blown memory comes.
Okay. So the answer is just plug away, do the work, and get as healthy as possible, it sounds like.
One foot in front of the other. Move everything. You know, part of when people do an intensive with us, we have a private Facebook page. And on that Facebook page, they're like the intensive, as Jeannie was describing at the beginning of the show, there's a 14-week fresh and raw food program. If people come to Heartland, we don't have 1 ounce of cooked food on the property. Everything is fresh and raw. Everything is as it comes from the ground, and therefore vital and strengthening. So part of the intensive process is a link to our private Facebook page with all of that food information, so you can do as much or as little of the food program as you want, but it's all laid out with recipes. There's 14 weeks of 3 meals a day of fresh and raw, high vitality food. There's instructions on how to set your kitchen up. There's instructions on what kind of equipment you need. There's instructions on when to order the food for this week's meals. That's all part and parcel. And also then there's a link to a private Trello app that has all of the recipes, pictures, and all of that. There are videos explaining it, and you can ask questions in the using the Facebook page too. So because that's a key part of the process. If people keep eating the same junk, you know, what kind of salt, sugar, fat are you going to have in this meal? Then the vitality meter doesn't move, and people don't get to process very much. So it's, you know, in every arena, and as you make, even, you know, it doesn't mean somebody has to do that whole thing, but as you make just small changes in different arenas, you know, you get out and you walk, you exercise, you get your body moving. That leads to a new level of vitality. You know, instead of drinking water from the tap, or instead of filling your morning mug with caffeine, sugar, and mucus-producing cream, if you drink a half a gallon of pure water, then you just made a major move in increasing vitality. And so, you know, everything that we do, for instance, in intensive is about, you know, okay, so here are the things that you can do. And each, you know, if you try to make a change in one arena, and you, like, I'm gonna change a 90-point situation, I'm gonna shift 90 points in this, the tendency is to bounce back. Whereas if you just make, you know, subtle changes in each arena, exercise, forgiveness, breathing, purity of water, food combining, each of those things contributes to building vitality, and it's each new level of vitality, you get to do a new level of work.
Awesome.
And that's what it's all about. And it just announced in my ear that it's going to cut us off in about 10 seconds. So if it's appropriate to continue this conversation tomorrow, it would be awesome to do so. Otherwise, holding the space for everybody to have the best year yet of their eternal lives. Thanks for those questions. Really meaningful, really, I think, rounded out the hour for us. Blessings.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.